And so I'm going to get started with our first panel. This panel was brought to you by the Positive Coaching Alliance. And our moderator is of the Positive Coaching panel is the director of the Timberwolves Lynx Basketball Academy and former Division III player, Troy Pearson. Well, you guys can start following up as I. And Dr. Heather Bergerson, the adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery at the University of Minnesota. Kevin Merkel has been the associate athletic director for the Minnesota High School League for 16 years and also is the activities director for Northfield High School for 14 years. Laura Halderson, she is the first head coach of the Gopher women's hockey team and guided the Gopher to 3 national championships. And Simon Almer, Simon is a mental skills coach at the Premier Sports Psychology. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys all for being here. Just want to echo Tariq's sentiment in that regards. And got some great topics today. So we're going to dive right in and kind of stay sensitive to time and stay on schedule. So let's start off with Simon. Maybe tell us a little bit about your practice, first of all, and dive into a little bit about the development that you see in athletes and you know, some of the mental strength and those types of things you see in a competitive athlete.
Yeah, so I'm a mental skills coach at Premier Sports Psychology. We have a team of sports psychologists and mental skills coaches there that work with individual athletes, with teams, with coaches, with parents. We've worked with the University of Minnesota for 7 years around campus there, providing services as one example. We work from the highest levels of sport at professional and Olympic levels, all the way down to the grassroots with collegiate, high school, middle school athletes. In terms of mental skills and development, as there are a lot of coaches in the room, and you know, many would recognize that the mental game can often be the differentiator between an average athlete and a good athlete, or a good athlete and a great athlete. And these skills need to be learned, just like we need to learn how to throw a tight spiral or, you know, how to take a slap shot. So, you know, the difference between when an athlete hears the word focus from the sideline from a coach, they naturally know what to focus on, and they understand the difference between maybe a broad focus versus a narrow focus. And so from a performance standpoint, you know, that's where the mental game can come in, as well as these are often enduring transferable skills that they can take from their sports experience into the classroom or into the workplace or into their relationships with key people.
We find within the Positive Coaching Alliance that, as you just mentioned, a lot of the skills that we learn, whether physical or mental, help build a baseline, if you will, or a bedrock for, you know, future growth, life, character building, those types of things. How do you, in your practice, work with your athletes to focus more on the mental game? I use 2 words there, you know, or mental, but then you use focus. So, for example, how do you get an athlete to focus? That can be such a cliche when a coach says it from the sideline.
Yep.
But how do you get an athlete to focus, or to focus just on their mental development as well as their physical?
Yeah, there's a number of elements. And the first thing we start with, especially when we're working with an individual athlete as opposed to team sessions, is understanding where they're at in the beginning. Often the very first step is just helping them build their athlete self-awareness. There are a lot of athletes that come off the field. You ask them about the game and they're not sure what their thoughts or feelings or body sensations were during the game. So the first step is often building that athlete self-awareness. And then as we move to focus, it's often take a picture in baseball, walking them through, okay, as you're preparing to pitch, there's often a progression of different focal points that they go through. Maybe it starts broad, what's the game situation? You know, what's the count? You know, how many out? What innings are we in? What happened when I threw to this pitcher the last time, the hitter the last time? And then often it comes down to a narrow focus, which may be simply targeting the very center.
Kevin, your experience as an administrator, both at the high school level and now with the State High School League, you've seen so many changes. I mean, we could talk about each detailed element. But what have you seen as the biggest change from your experience and your leadership in youth sports?
It's hard to say. Sometimes we talk about kids. I think kids really don't change that much, but the environment they grow up in changes. And along with that, I think the thing that's changed is the culture of youth sport. And with that, high school is certainly part of it. On the emphasis on winning just keeps getting greater and greater, and puts a lot of pressure on administrators and coaches as well. And then just the size and the impact of youth sports and the sport specialization that's going on, that continues to grow. That was around to a certain point. I was a head coach back in the 1980s, but we didn't have those pressures of year-round things going on near as much. We tried to get kids to be involved in other sports, but now they're playing the same sport year-round. And of course, that starts to hurt participation and hurt numbers. But there didn't used to be fall baseball or fall basketball and some of those kinds of things. I'm not trying to pick on any one sport. But we really believe, from a high school standpoint, it's best if a kid has a well-rounded experience and participates in more than one sport. In fact, studies will show that you can become a better athlete by participating more in one sport. So I think that, and then along with that, because of those influence youth sports, and because of the investment that parents make, both time and money, that increases the pressure that you get from parents then as kids get into high school level, and why my kid's not playing or why they're not developing to become the best or whatever that might be.
We'll talk a little bit here with sports specialization, and there's a separate panel for that discussion because it is a huge development, if you will, or change over the last few decades. But talking about the parents, you use the word investment. So many of us are parents here, and some say, we've invested our time, money in the development of our children. Therefore, they should see X amount of playing time. They should be the captain. They should be the leading scorer. They should get the scholarship, whatever goes into a mindset of a parent. From the high school league, things that you have been putting together for high schools and coaches, but also just what are you seeing other parents or school administrators, how are they handling that more specifically from the parent perspective, right? The pressure that the parents are putting on coaches nowadays.
Well, it's an issue, and it gets caught up in, I just heard a story yesterday where coach is under pressure because the kids and parents are concerned the way he substitutes in basketball. He puts certain kids in for certain defenses or certain parts of the game, and they don't think their kid's always in the right spot that enhances them to be as good as they can be. So
because those parents know them best, right?
Well,
yeah.
In some cases, and one part of that comes down is the culture of sport in general. We all know more. It's on TV all the time, 24/7. You hear all the pundits talking about strategies and so on. So I think some people do think that they know more. But and I want to back off a little bit with parents. In my own experience, most parents are great. Most parents are really great. And I saw that both as a coach, as an AD, and even when I wasn't that long ago, I was a youth sport parent as well. But there just takes a few. Mm-hmm. And part of the challenge is those few can make it very difficult for everyone. And that's the challenge. But it comes to an attitude. I think we have to do more education. I just heard somebody talk the other day. It was an athletic director, and he was talking about his own son, I believe was in 5th grade, playing basketball. And he was one of 30 playing in the travel league in that community. There were another 40 or 50 playing in-house basketball. So there were 70, 80 kids playing basketball in 5th grade. When they're in high school, now in high school there'll be a grade ahead of them and a grade behind them involved too. How many kids are actually going to play varsity basketball? About 8. Mm-hmm. About 8. And so out of those 80 kids, maybe 2 or 3 are actually going to advance to that level. And out of that, how many are going to advance to the college level? It's very, very few. And so what we have to do is realize that as parents, if we don't realize that the experience that the kids have along the way and what they're learning in 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th grade, because eventually they're not going to be able to continue their career, comes to an end. And so make sure that that's a positive experience and we're learning life skills that can help us throughout our lives. That's really what has to be our purpose, not making the varsity or getting that elusive scholarship.
Right. Positive Coaching Alliance, and you guys know about some of the core values there, but one of the elements that Positive Coaching Alliance has in its development zone, if you will, is to help focus, a redirect focus of parents away from the winning or away from the, ultra competitive, to help support our young people to learn life skills, to be able to adapt. Sports can be a test kitchen to life, right? And no other areas do you learn how to communicate, how to work with others, dedication, commitment, failure, get through anxiety. All those elements can help develop into skills we all want our kids to have. And I think oftentimes we see where the win at all cost, or my kid should be in this right substitution pattern, kind of overshadows that and takes that away. How have you seen some coaches deal with that with coaches or with parents? So you have some high school coaches that you've seen very successful. What have you seen them that maybe we could pass along to some others?
Well, I can remember some coaches, and you got to be careful how you say this, but they won't talk to parents, especially in the older level, because they want the kids, if they have a problem, to come to the coach, because that's part of that learning and growing experience. So I'll be glad to talk to your son or daughter, and we'll work through some of those issues, but that should happen first before we get involved for the parents. I can remember many times where parents would come in and they always want to talk, and they don't want their kid to know that they came in. And well, why not? Because the kid probably didn't want you to come in. A lot of times the kids are better off and understand the situation, but it also goes back to dealing with failure. Part of the thing, and I look back at my son's experience most recently, and it's a few years ago now, but my youngest son, some of the best lessons he learned were through failure. And having to experience that. And that's hard to go through. It's hard to go through as a person, hard to go through as a parent. And sometimes that means maybe not playing as much as you want, or maybe in a tough situation where things don't go well. But those are the lifelong lessons that are going to help you the rest of your life. And I think we just have to keep talking about that. We have some other programs that maybe we can get to a little bit later that we're working on at the high school league that help to teach that. And it really fits in close to what PCA is. And one of the simple ways to say that is our goal is to win, but our purpose is life lessons. And if we can try to learn that, in PCA we talk about second goal coaches and second goal parents. And parents are really stuck on that second goal, which is life lessons, not on the winning part.
Yeah, excellent. Coach Laura, you've coached youth, you've coached amateur, you've coached Olympic athletes, you've coached Division I national champion athletes. So you've seen coaching at all levels over, I won't say how long of a period of time, but how have you seen coaching change? And you can speak to that from the Olympic level, the Division I level, the high school recruitment level, wherever you want to go with that. How have you seen coaching change?
Well, I like a lot of the things that Kevin said because they apply, I think, to pretty much any level. And that focus on winning is a challenge. And I'm as competitive as anybody, believe me. But I think having that perspective of what's really important goes a long way. So I touched base with Brad Frost, who's the current women's hockey coach at the University of Minnesota, because I've been out of college coaching for a while now. I asked him that question, and I mean, he told me that social media is a huge thing. And when I was thinking about that, and I think there's good and bad with social media, but when I thought, what's the big concept with that? I was thinking about how really technology and the ways we communicate have changed, and social media is a part of that. And I still work at the University of Minnesota, and I interact with college-age people. I work with interns who are young graduates, and I really have noticed that they don't have as much experience or interest in, talking one-on-one with somebody, or even talking on the phone. Emails are a lot of work. They want quick things. They want to be able to shoot a text or, a tweet, whatever it may be. And so I think coaches today, pretty much whatever level, need to realize the world we live in because, pretty much everybody has their phone with them all the time. And that takes away from interpersonal interaction as well. And as a coach, I think one of the big things is creating a team and building unity. And it's a little bit more difficult when people are promoting themselves on social media. So I think that's a big one. Another thing he mentioned that I've seen from afar is the recruiting timeline. So from a college perspective, these young athletes are feeling more pressure earlier to decide where they're going to go to college. And that's a challenge in terms of getting to know each other on both sides and trying to figure out what is the best thing to do. And it takes away their focus from what they're doing at the time. So if I'm a ninth grader and I have college coaches wanting to talk to me, how much am I really focusing on my current teammates and what I want to do, at that time, while I'm looking ahead to where I'm going to go to college, and I see my friends committing, and I'm a sophomore and I haven't decided yet. Well, what does that mean? So there's pressure with that, and I think that's a real challenge. And then specialization was the other thing that he mentioned that sounds like is a hot topic for everybody. But I grew up playing high school volleyball, softball, and basketball, and then hockey on the side. And I loved all those experiences. I felt not only physically is it a positive, but just, you're part of a team and you're going through good and bad times and you're learning about leadership and working together and overcoming adversity. And the more experiences I think that you have in those areas, the better off you're going to be in the long run, both on whatever team you're on, but also life in general.
You have coached at the highest female athletic level, right? Olympic, Division I. What do you see, if anything, is a difference between coaching boys and coaching girls?
Okay, so I haven't coached boys, but I've talked to people who have, and then they've coached girls. And it's very interesting because I don't know if you know, but girls and boys are different. So
That's beautiful insight, Laura. Thank you.
there was a coach I knew at the college level they were asked that question, and they said, well, hockey's hockey. And I think we're treating it the same. Well, that male coach didn't last very long in our sport because there are differences. And I think the coaches that are successful, like I said, I didn't coach the guys, but the ones who did and made that transition, the ones that are successful realize differences and try to understand how to deal with those. I would say specifically, one difference is girls and women take things a little bit more literally. So when you're explaining things, they might want to know black and white. What was I supposed to do there? Where was I supposed to go? So my advice on that is for coaches to teach concepts. Get your players to think on their own and read and react to whatever's going on because they will take things literally. They're good at listening. I hear that. These girls listen more than the boys. I hear that. But they take things literally. And they're very social. They want to be part of a group and have fun together. And so if coaches can create a positive environment where they have fun and they get to bond, I think girls really like that maybe even more than guys. But with that, if things aren't going well, there can be what we call drama. And I don't know if anyone here can relate to that, but I've heard that from coaches who have switched over, and they'll talk about, I spent a lot more time dealing with some off-ice things than I did with the guys. So that's just, we're wired differently. So I think those are some of the differences that I've noticed in my career.
As a dad of 2 daughters, and you coaching at the highest level girls, what would you say to me as how to motivate female athletes?
You're saying as a
guy,
parent?
yeah, as a parent, a male parent, how do you motivate?
Well, just the whole parent dynamic in general, I would say there are a couple of things that I've learned. A couple years ago, I did a couple speaking engagements with kids, with teams, and what I learned was they can be conflicted if the message of the coach is different than the message of the player. And I agree that the parents, they love their kids, they want what's best for their kids. But sometimes they don't realize that what they do and what they say is making it harder on their kid to be successful and to feel good about themselves. And so I think being positive is important. I think letting coaches coach is important. I think if you have honest conversations with your child about, you know, how they feel, I think those parents would learn that some things are not beneficial. And just you know, what I sense from these athletes that I've spoken to about this, they understand a coach sees their team every day. Okay, they're worried about everybody, whereas the parent is focused on their kid. And so it's a different perspective that, you know, the player understands that, but sometimes they're getting these mixed messages, and it's creating this conflict in their head that, you know, my advice to those players is, I know that your parents are the adults and you're the kid, but if you can have a conversation with them when everyone's calm, to talk about like how that makes you feel and what what you want from your parent, I think those parents would adjust. And so the other thing to your question about motivation, you know, I had a former player's dad say to me once that what he would do is wait, like especially if it wasn't such a good game, or either individually or as a team, he would let his child ask questions or initiate a conversation. Instead of, you're in the car, okay, we're going to talk about the game, and we're going to talk about what you did wrong or what your coach did wrong. You know, just to sort of step back and let that conversation evolve and see what your kid wants to talk about. I think, you know, you're not the coach. You want to love your kid unconditionally. That doesn't mean everything's always rosy and cheerful, but make sure that they know you're their parent first and foremost, and you're not their coach.
I had a watershed moment to that point with my daughter when she was in high school. I won't get into the whole story, but I was trying to be that coach, or trying to help them understand what the coach was doing, saying, you know, their decisions. And she started crying, and she said just real simply, "Dad, I don't need you to be my coach. I need you to be my dad." And it's like, man, where's the hole that I can go dive into? And so I thought of that, and a cliche or a phrase popped in my head is not to be a car coach. And I think every parent, whether you know the sport or not, you want to dissect the game because when you get in the car driving home, because you think the kid wants to talk about it. And often Simon, you would agree to that?
The ride home, we've all heard, is often the part of sport that people least enjoy.
What's the best, you know, psychologically, what's the best approach to working with young people after a game? To your point, that they didn't play well, the team didn't play well, whether I'm a coach or a parent, you know, everybody's different, I understand that, but what's the optimum approach to take psychologically with them?
I'd say the tendency is often parents are hanging on to the result of the game a lot longer than their son or daughter often is. I'd err towards, just like Laura's saying, less is more. Open-ended questions are better than close-ended ones. Asking them simply, you know, what was the best moment in the game today for you? What did you enjoy the most? If you're going to ask them, if anything, it's about, I often talk about controllables, attitude, preparation, and effort. So you certainly as a parent say, you know, how do you think you're... But even that, after a game that didn't go well, can be viewed defensively. Give them space. Talk about, you know, going to see a movie or whatever else is coming up. It's not your job to help them dissect the game unless they're really seeking that from you.
Good.
Can I jump in for
Yeah,
a quick
please do,
comment?
Kevin.
We've had some situations when you talk about the kids and what their parents' role should be, and it's hard sometimes for kids to talk directly to parents about that. So we're aware of some situations where what the coach has done with the team, he's had the kids have gotten together and they've created kind of a list of, here's how we want you as parents, here's how you can best support us. So it's a little bit more impersonal, but they have a list of 8 or 10 things, and it includes the car ride home, and includes what to say from the stands and what not to say, and let our coach be the coach and you be the parent. And it works out quite well.
I like
Great
it.
idea.
That is a great idea. A player-generated parent code of conduct.
Exactly
Nice.
it. Yep.
Nice. Reverse the roles. Dr. Heather, do you mind if I call you Dr. Heather?
Just call me Heather.
Okay. All right. Well, because I don't have to give a copay, so I can just call you Heather, right? Okay. All right. As an orthopedic physician, you're regularly treating athletes of all ages, you know, the weekend warrior to the novice, you know, youth, adult. What trends are you seeing from your practice with youth athletes that are driving the way you are treating them or have to change the way you're treating them? What's the biggest things out there? I'm sure concussion is one. What else?
Yeah, so more and more injuries, a lot of overuse injuries, and burnout. And the forces that are driving those trends are youth sports specialization, year-round play. But what's driving those trends is parental peer pressure and money, right? So as parents, we want to provide the best opportunities for our kids to succeed in sport, but we are completely misguided, and we are training these kids like little professionals. I have kids that come in complaining of back pain, saying that their coach had them do 500 burpees one day. I mean, 500 burpees, what is the point of that? And you're just going to destroy your team. And so, you know, these kids are, they're not skeletally mature enough, developmentally, emotionally mature enough to be trained like this. And unfortunately, they are customers. They're not young athletes. So we really focus on encouraging them to play multiple sports year-round. And that doesn't mean that you're playing soccer, hockey, and lacrosse all at the same time. That's actually when I see more injuries, is when these kids are going from sport to sport to sport. And you know, play the sport of the season. And studies show, like Kevin said, that can reduce the incidence of injury and of burnout and keep them playing longer and doing what they love.
So we're going to get to sports specialization in a moment, but as a physician who's treating these athletes, if there was one thing that you could change besides sports specialization, you know, in youth sports, or you could, you know, the coaches association or the high school league or whatever national association said, hey, there's one thing we're going to change and you get to decide what it is, what would it be?
That's a big question. I mean, youth sports culture,
The culture.
the whole thing, the monster it has become. But that's really hard, and that's what we're trying to do with Positive Coaching Alliance, is to educate about how to get back to the roots of why sports are so beneficial, and to create that character building positive environment for our kids.
On the injury aspect of it, what would you say about concussions and how, even as parents, we're treating these? We were talking beforehand where, you know, as most kids now aren't willing to say they have a headache or that they did hit their head. And even if they were, parents might be as we were talking about, tough guy, where it's all right, you just got the phrase I always had growing up, my coaches, is you just got your bell rung, right? I don't even know really what that means, but.
It means you have a concussion.
Right. Well, back then, you know, it didn't mean that. It meant suck it up.
Yeah.
But what would you say as far as the concussion element? I know that you could talk an hour, and I've been with you where you've gone through that whole process, but what are some highlights that we as parents can say, I need to take a different focus on that approach?
So I think that the more we learn about concussion, sometimes we realize the less we really know, but I think our management of it has become so much better than it was. Whereas we just said, oh, you're fine, go back in, you just got your bell rung. And now the pendulum has, I think at one point the pendulum swung
Maybe
too far the other way
Yeah.
a little bit, but I think we're in a good place now. And Dr. Amy Custer is going to be talking about this in a panel later on too. So she's really the expert with that and can talk more about it. But I think, you know, these kids, we have one brain, and we need to protect that and really take these seriously, and not be pressured by our coaches or our peers to get back to play before you're ready.
All four of you are going to answer this next question. If you're writing a job description for a coach, youth, high school, whatever it might be, what would you say are the key elements that a coach should be possessing to coach at any level nowadays? Now, I understand there's different levels of expertise, but some basic core principles that you would say maybe through experience have gone away that need to be reinstituted. We've mentioned a few of them, culture, those types of things. But what are some key elements that a coach should have besides X's and O's? Start with you, Coach Laura.
Well, the thing that comes to my mind, I remember that we had our volleyball coach, Mike Hebert, at the University of Minnesota, and I remember sitting down with him one day. We were talking about different books that we both enjoyed, and I said, Mike, if you could say what is the one thing that's most important for a coach, what's the one quality? And he said that the players know you believe in them. And I thought, that's great. I mean, it's not about, I mean, I agreed with that 100% because what I found is, again, I'm all about team. I've always played team sports. We have to work together, and to do that, you want to encourage your players. You want to let them know that you do believe in them, and that, you know, if your motivation is about yourself or it's strictly about winning, I think that's going to come back to bite you at some point. And even myself, when I would coach at the Division I level or with some national team experiences that I've had, I had to remind myself, why am I coaching? You know, I got into coaching because I wanted to make a positive impact on people, on kids, on athletes, whoever. Hockey was a platform. It was a vehicle to do that. And I think that's a perspective thing that sometimes coaches can lose sight of. And so to me, that's sort of big picture, number one.
Good. Simon?
I'd say great coaches need to be great observers, not only to be able to teach the specifics of their sport, but to be able to understand all of the individuals that make up a team if it's a team sport. So I think being a great observer, and if they have that, the ability to connect with all kinds of players. Most coaches normally have tons of passion for their sport, and they're very competitive people naturally. And they can relate to similar kind of players normally very well. But they need to be able to connect and be an important person for all of the players on their team. And so having that adaptability to connect would be another thing I'd build into that job description.
I agree with that to the point where I think sometimes our coaches have gone, the pendulum, if you will, has swung too far that they're too analytical, too X's and O's. It's all about, you know, even going into any youth sport practice, majority of the time in a practice, they're putting in an offense or a defense, right? Which is part of it, but not the fundamentals. Or, again, talking back about growing, you know, teaching life lessons, building character, getting to know the individuals and help them grow is definitely something that's kind of got pushed away in this win-at-all-cost competition level. So the Minnesota State High School League, I'm sure, deals with, you know, training coaches, and it's always a topic. We, you know, probably from school ADs, how do we train our coaches? How do we get them better in this area? What one area or two would you say has to come back into the forefront of a coach?
Well, the most important thing I think is as I grow and learn more and more is you have to hire, well, I learned a long time ago, you hire personality because you don't change that. You can teach, people can learn X's and O's, they can learn strategies of the game, but your personality of the coach is what you get. And I think one of the most important qualities, or maybe the most important, is that they care about kids. It's very similar to what you said about believing in them, but the kids need to know that you care about them. That's maybe one of the biggest motivators for them to perform. And along with that, we need coaches of high moral character. Sports don't teach character. There's studies out there, in fact, that show that the longer you're in sport, the worse your character might get. And there are things, think about it, and as you go to the higher levels and so on, and some of the things that we see, because of the win at all costs and the pressures and the money involved and everything else, can destroy our moral character as well. What sports can do is it can be a platform where coaches of high character can use sports to teach character. And that's where it has to happen. And the way they do that, one of the best things with the caring is building relationships with their kids. And that helps them to observe things so that when things are going wrong, whether it be something mentally or physically or whatever, they're more likely to catch on to that. So they have to build that relationship. And what we've learned is that teams that do that, and they still have to have the X's and O's, and they have to condition and do those things, but those are usually the most successful teams. Your most successful teams have that chemistry, or that togetherness, and the relationships that are built with each other and with the coach. So it really comes down to caring, relationship type coaches. We talk about, with one of the programs we're working with now, is transformational coaches versus transactional coaches. And a transactional coach says, if you do this for me, you can play. Block a little harder, jump a little higher, whatever, and you can play. A transformational coach will do the things I was just talking about.
It's interesting that transformational versus transactional, that carries on well beyond sports, doesn't it? Relationships,
All over.
family, business. So again, which is something Positive Coaching Alliance is trying to teach, is it's well beyond the playing field, the ice, the court. From a medical perspective, or even as a parent perspective, what do you think a coach needs to refocus on now?
I think that the coach has to set the tone, set the positive culture of the team. And they have to, just like in parenting, you have to set those expectations early and often. And it's the coach's responsibility to keep that culture positive. And there's so many times where it starts out that way, but then the dynamics of the kids interacting, things start to turn, and really the coach needs to be aware of that happening and constantly reset it. What do you think as a trainer
What do
for
I think?
PCA?
Wow, man, my week is done. I've been asked what I think. No, no, I think it is the culture. I think it's everything we've said, and unfortunately, there's not one magic answer or one elixir that fixes it all. But I think it all does come down to culture, because all these elements we talked about are built within a culture, right? So whether it's my home culture that I want to model, positive, filling emotional tanks, helping them understand that mistakes are going to happen, all these types of things that are in the culture, it's trying to figure out what is the most important. And unfortunately, I think, and many of us can have experienced it, it's that win at all cost. And I would say from a coaching perspective, I understand there's different levels. The level Laura coached at, I mean, it was you had to win or you lose your job, right? So there is that part I understand, but if it could get back to having fun, building kids up, it sounds weird, but I would want to put top in a coach's job description, the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Honor others the way you want to be honored. Honor the game the way you would want it honored. So thank you for asking. Very nice. Well,
Troy,
we got a couple of moments here, but any closing comments?
So just quick, you mentioned fun. And every survey I've ever seen with kids, especially at the high school level, when they rank what's important to them, fun's always the most important.
Right.
I just heard a stat the other day from a survey they did. Winning and losing was like 40th on the list. And we forget about that because the kids are more concerned about their relationships and how they feel. And fun means a lot of it. That doesn't just mean a bunch of jollies. You can have fun by working hard and accomplishing your goals as well. So there's a lot of good things that have to go into that. But I think we lose sight of that too many times.
We've lost sight of a lot. And hopefully today you guys will hear some other panels that will kind of refocus us back to Simon, where we started on focusing. I think that this is great, and I appreciate Players Health for having this workshop summit, to be able to kind of refocus in different areas. So Coach Laura, Simon, Kevin, Dr. Heather, thank you for your time, and we appreciate you guys listening, and hopefully there's a little bit that you can pull out of this and take back with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Yeah.
Good job.